Nooyi, thank you very much for joining us here at She the People. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I read your book. I mean, I've also followed your journey for a long time. Why did you want to write this book? What's your big piece with it?
When I left PepsiCo, there was a lot of talk about why weren't you replaced by a woman? Why didn't you replace yourself with a woman as a CEO? It's surprising because they asked women CEOs that they never asked the men CEOs about it, even though women CEOs are such a small percentage of the total number of CEOs. Along with that question, they kept asking me, how did you do it? How did you stay married and have two kids and become CEO? There must have been some manual or something that you have that you should share with us because we'd all like to do the same thing too. As I sat back and thought about it, I started to dig into why aren't there more women bubbling up to the top to become CEOs? And I realized that they come into the workforce in large numbers. By the time they reach middle management, the numbers have dwindled. And the pipeline is just broken. And as you dig in more deeply into this issue, you realize that any woman who also wants to have a family faces the motherhood penalty where they just cannot balance it all. There are no support systems that exist for people to balance being a family builder and engaging in productive work outside the home and earning a paycheck. And then on top of that, they face all kinds of biases inside the company that really causes an enormous stress. So I set out to write some policy papers on what can be done to address this issue. And those around me, people who truly cared about what I was doing, said, all these policy papers are great, Indra, but the shelf life of these is like a week. People read it and throw it away. On the other hand, if you were to inform what you were saying with the arc of your life, with stories of your life, and laid it out not as a memoir in a tell-all basis, but your journey and why you're saying what you're saying about supporting women, supporting young family builders, the manual, if you want to call it that, translated into your life, would be so much better and engaging for people to read. And publishers came my way and said, people really want to read about it. So what started reluctantly as a book, now I've gotten a lot of enthusiasm and energy around it because my writer did a great job working with me to translate all of these thoughts into a readable book.
There is, as leaders, one of the big pitfalls that women find, themselves in is the fact that they apologize too much. They think their views are not good enough. Their ideas may or may not be, acceptable, and so on. What were the three things that most women end up doing in corporate or any organization that you consciously did not do?
I think your observation is right. Women do apologize, or worse still, when they make a dreadful mistake and they don't apologize. That's equally bad, okay? But being way too apologetic doesn't help at all. Women also tend not to put their hands up for the tough assignments. So when they go to safe assignments, they don't get noticed as much. And third is, even when they do the great assignments and they get great results, they tend to give the credit to other people. Instead of standing up and saying, I delivered. You don't have to thump your chest, but something about saying that I did deliver this on this project. So I think we have to show women that other women are doing it right. This is where role models come into play, Shaili. It's not enough having role models at the top. You've got to expose their behavior to other women to see how do these role models behave in difficult situations. How do they behave when they have to deal with difficult people or difficult crises? Let people see how their behavior changes with the situation so that they can emulate that behavior. Right now, we keep saying there should be role models, but role modeling and mentoring in a passive environment is very different than watching people in action. And it's not what you see in movies. That's completely contrived because it's a movie, you dismiss it. In a corporate environment, when you're really going through tough situations, how do you behave? One great comment I heard, both from men and women who used to work with me at PepsiCo, who've since left PepsiCo, still at PepsiCo. They say to me when they meet me, or they'll write to me and say, Indra, sitting here in company X or in job Y, I was faced with a very difficult situation. And I first asked myself, how would Indra approach this?
Mm-hmm.
How would Indra approach this? Now, that's a tall compliment, because what they're basically saying is that there's a thought process you have to go through. There's a calmness with which you have to approach the issue. Even if you're having butterflies in your stomach, doesn't matter. It's how are you this duck that looks calm on top, but is, fiercely
Paddling away.
moving underneath the water. So how do you project that level of calmness to people?
So I just followed you on Instagram and I saw that you were chatting with a lot of young girls. I really, one of the questions I always ask women leaders, and it's one of my favorite questions, is that how important is financial freedom for women, and why that conversation needs to happen at a more wider scale among women? Because there is this perception, oh, when women are chatting, they're talking about shoes and bags, and financial freedom is not even a priority. So first, why do you think, as a successful woman, it's very important to have it?
I make that point in chapter 1 of my book. Right
Yeah.
up front, we deal with it. Families are wonderful, but families are messy. Families are fragile. You never know when the family structure breaks up, or there's an unexpected event in the family structure which results in the primary wage earner unable to bring in the bucks, or just disappears from the scene, for whatever reason. What happens to the family then? What's the woman supposed to do? In many cases, the in-laws are not taking the responsibility, because once the guy is not in the picture, they just cast the daughter-in-law out of the picture. What happens then? If there are kids, who's going to support them? So I think we have to think about not going to school at that point to earn a paycheck, because that's another 5-year process. It ain't going to work. You've got to be prepared for any situation. So it's very important that women have the power of the purse, have the ability to go out and get a job to ensure family stability. And I have to tell you one thing, as old age draws close for many of us, if you don't have enough wealth to retire and live in comfort, you're once again beholden to your kids.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is not bad, because that's the intergenerational responsibility. But in many cases, you don't want to be financially a burden. And so the only way you can build wealth for your family is if both go to work. So I think this is an emotional argument, an economic argument, a social argument. I just think that women being completely dependent on somebody else for day-to-day living, for crises, managing through crises, I think it's just wrong. It's dangerous. It's not good for families.
So, just when you were writing all of this, how did the process play out for you? So there was the journey, but there's also all the writing that you did with your book. What was it like becoming an author and penning it all down? What were the struggles, and what was the writing process like for you?
By myself, this book would have been written in 3 months, but would have been unreadable, because it would have been bullet points, dash points, very dry. I was lucky that I was introduced to a great writer, Lisa Kessinar. She was at Bloomberg for about 22 years, a great writer. She was an investigative reporter, and she covered women's issues at Bloomberg. So she understood all what I'm talking about. She understood business, she understood women's issues. And so when she became my key writer, the question is, what's our process? How do I dictate hours and hours and hours of stories about my life and growing up? How do we frame chapters? Then how do I allow her to convert all of this into a beautifully written prose? And she gives me a draft, and I work on it, and I work on it, and I work on it to edit it, enhance it, change it, so it reflects exactly what I want to say. The partnership between the two of you has got to be very, very good. And in my case, I was very lucky that not only did I find a great writer, we gelled very well. So we had this production process where every chapter she would send to me, I would work it, send it back to her. She would send me the next chapter, but then a chapter would take about 6 or 8 revisions before we got it right. So it took us about a year and a half, non-stop working through the pandemic. But I gained a friend, I gained a collaborator, so it feels good.
What was your big headline when you wrapped up the book? What was the one thing that you took away as Indra Nooyi's story?
For me, the whole journey was a discovery. I discovered things about myself and about my life that I'd forgotten, or the roles people played. So I think in writing the book, it was a self-discovery for me too. And then you also realize how much went into getting to where I did and how much it took to stay where I did. I mean, getting to be CEO is one thing, but stay as CEO for 12 years was another amazing thing. And then this discovery, you realize the huge role that your in-laws, your parents, your extended family played. And then, of course, you're grateful you have this incredible tether where your 2 daughters, and the luck of the draw, or the lottery of life, if you want to call it, in my choice of the spouse. So when you put it all together, the discovery process was amazing. When you put the whole story together, you realize that it does take a village, indeed, to juggle all these different jobs and careers and move ahead.
Yeah. So I have about 12 minutes left, and I just wanted to spend some time talking about the role women can play in the economy. I would say, I would dare to say that someone like yourself is still an aberration from the large chunk of women who don't work, don't follow a career path, and seek to achieve. And in India, that number has dwindled over the last few decades from 35% to lower than 24%, which is not a sign that's good for a growing economy, where half your population basically just puts up its hands and says, we're not going to work, or we don't have enough opportunities. As somebody who's seen India from different angles, how critical is it for women to get into the workforce?
So the women in India absolutely impress me. They are brilliant, smart, driven, are doing exceedingly well in colleges and professional schools. I mean, the caliber of the women are fantastic. First point. And I also see the Indian Americans here, who are also from Indian parents and just brilliant. And I mentored these 20 South Asian kids. Oh my God, they were just brilliant. So I look and say, here is a talent pool that is just spectacular.
Yeah.
Today, in every country, to be competitive and to come out ahead, the whole thing is about talent. That is the single biggest driver of differentiation between countries. So if people from India can come to a country like the US and do well, why can't India create an environment that keeps them engaged, occupied, excited, contributing to a country that needs all the talent to make it move forward? I don't think we can satisfy ourselves saying, as long as we got the best of the male talent, that's enough. Not enough, because you got to pick from the best and brightest of the total pool. And you got to give them all the support systems to be able to contribute to the economy. Now, you can say, but then what happens to the kids? Okay. Fact of the matter is, when you do have extended family structures, everybody has to chip in to help. And I think as a country, we have to think about how India can build support structures, care support structures for childcare and senior care in societies and communities, because as a country, we are going to fall behind if we don't tap into the power of women. I mean, all the studies, you've seen them, say that India's GDP can grow an additional 5 to 8 points if women are fully brought into the economy.
So a subset of opportunities that women have suddenly discovered is the power of digital, and how in one way, having access to the internet has opened up new jobs, as well as taken away this concern that I have to get out of the house, I need to seek permission. Now I can live inside my house despite everything else that goes on, but still find an outlet to work or find opportunities or learn. So how important do you think digital has been to show the light to women through that route?
Very important, but it's also done another thing, which is allowed remote working. Even if you had a job in the office, it allowed remote working. But what cannot happen is, because you're home working, you have to do more work in the house, more housework, more childcare, more senior care. People say, after all, she's working from home, so everybody descends on you to take care of them. That's not fair either. So I think we have to sit down and think about each woman as, hey, she's a human being. How much can she work and toil and cope with so much pressure and so much criticism from everybody around her?
Yeah.
If we were to just look at her for who she is, that's why I love She the People. And if you really personalize it and say she the person individually before she becomes She the People, how do we want to treat her? We revere women in Indian mythology.
Yes.
We revere women in Hinduism, in religion. But in real life, let us carry that forward. Let's treat them with respect. Let's give them the choice to be who they are. And let's give them the support structure to work. One of the points I wanted to make earlier too, Shaili, is that if you look at the jobs of the future, caring jobs, nursing, they're all female-friendly jobs. And if you don't bring women into the workforce, who is going to do all that work? And the other thing too, I remember when we were looking at many farming jobs when I was at PepsiCo, women would struggle because the men would get the paycheck and many would go drink it off at the end of the period. The family needs the money. So if the husband is not bringing home the bucks, the woman has to go earn the money. She has to toil in the fields because a family has to be kept going.
Yeah.
So I think that women are trying their damnedest to keep the family going, put a roof over the head, put food on the table, with or without the support of the men. If the men come along, is great. Like I'm very lucky with what I had, and many, many people have the support of their spouse. And spouses have a very important role to play. But once you give birth to children, okay, you've got to worry about a larger group of people than just the husband.
Yeah.
That's a big responsibility.
Indeed, you know what you said, something about care jobs of the future. I've been reading a great deal about how innovation is going to change our lives, because how technology is going to take over, machines are going to take over, and this debate has been on at every decade. But I think this time around it's more about how robots are going to take over a lot of jobs, and majority of the jobs that might get taken over seem to be the jobs men are doing at this point.
That's right.
And I'd love to know your thoughts on how that thinking is shaping as to what will then basically remain, because there's this perception, right, and I'm sure you've experienced it, the soft skills belong to women, but somehow they belong to the future now.
The future is all about soft skills. Those are the ones that you cannot automate away. And so all the more reason we have to build support structures. But then for all of society, men and women, lifelong learning becomes critical. Because if anybody wants to keep a job in the future, they have to retool themselves for the skills of the future, which means lifelong learning, lifelong learning, lifelong learning. Underline it 3 ways. And if you don't do that, crisis, because your job could go away, your skills could become irrelevant, and you could become redundant in the job. So, you've just got to retool yourself constantly, men and women.
And the final question is, what would your advice be to young women who are wondering how they should take on their career or let's say entrepreneurship?
I'd say the next few decades are the decades of women, because the economy needs smart people, and a lot of the women are the smart people. So the decades of the women. If you choose to have a family and engage in paid work outside the house, know that you have to build a support structure. And also know that having a family can be very fulfilling too. So it's not all stress. When you have kids, it's just a very fulfilling thing, at least for me. And so build a support structure, because without the support structure, you will be running ragged. Then the work, also the job outside the home is not going to be fun anymore. And I'd say to them, finally, make sure you have some economic freedom, some financial freedom. Please make sure you understand finances. Make sure that you become financially literate.
Great. Indra Nooyi, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your time. Wonderful to reconnect after all these years and have this opportunity to catch up.
Thank you, Shaili, and you look fantastic. And thank you for a wonderful, wonderful set of